On your Monday episode of Locked On Raptors, he's huge, he's Canadian, but is he a good prospect? We peel back the many layers of the Zach Edey onion coming up. Thanks for hanging.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? And welcome to another episode of Locked On Raptors, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Monday, June the 10th, and I'm your host, Sean Woodley. I've been covering the Toronto Raptors now for 10 seasons on various platforms. You can find all my work over on the Hell website at Woodley Sean. You can find the show on Instagram at Locked On Raptors. And of course, you can join us in the Locked On Raptors Discord server. The link is in the description of the podcast. A great place to come hang out, talk about fake trades, talk about the draft, talk about the offseason, the finals, etc., etc. It's all going on in there. Great place to come hang out and become part of our listener community over on the Discord. Again, free to join as always. Link in the description of the podcast as always. Of course, you can find the show for free wherever you get your podcasts on the audio side of things. Follow, subscribe, rate, review, tell a friend. Always appreciated when you support the show, however you choose to support the show. And on audio, there's a few ways that are classics. Go do those. And also, you can find us on YouTube. You can go subscribe to the Locked On Raptors YouTube channel. And if you hit the notification bell, you can do that as well. It's a double whammy, as you will start getting push notifications every single time the show is about to premiere or go live, on top of just being subscribed to the channel. A wonderful thing. We'd love to see you there in the live chats, things like that. So thanks in advance for supporting the YouTube channel as well. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at LinkedIn Jobs, who help you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right. On today's show, we've mostly been kind of tackling draft prospects 3 at a time, taking 10 minutes to kind of dive into each guy, the strengths, the weaknesses, the potential fit with the Raptors. But I wanted to take today's show to focus on one very enormous guy, who is, of course, Zach Edey, the 7'4" Canadian, the 2-time defending player of the year in college basketball down in the States. Really, really excellent basketball player for Purdue, has Zach Edey been for the last 4 seasons. And he's a polarizing prospect. There are a lot of schools of thought on Edey, a lot of, belief that he's going to be like a starter level player. Seems to be a lot of belief that he's going to be kind of a bust. He's probably going to end up somewhere in the middle, as is usually the case with these things. But just because of his physical profile, because of his sort of uniqueness as a player, I think it is really difficult to kind of parse what his college dominance and production means for what his NBA projectability is going to be. So we're going to try to do that today. We're going to dig into the reasons why Zach Edey might be good, the reasons why Zach Edey might struggle to adapt to the NBA, and ultimately get into whether or not the Raptors would be justified in taking Zach Edey with the 19th overall pick. I can't imagine he's going to be there at 31, but that, stands for that as well, I suppose, too. Is he a guy worth taking for the Raptors when it comes to the fit, when it comes to the upside, et cetera, et cetera? We'll get into all of that. Let's start off with the reasons why Zach Edey could be very good. Number one, haven't mentioned it before, have I? He's huge. He's a really big guy. He's 7'4". He's 300 pounds. He's got a standing reach of like 9'7". He's got a wingspan of 7'10.5". He's 7'4", 300 pounds without shoes per his combine measurements. He is, simply put, one of the biggest human beings in the world, and certainly one of the biggest human beings playing basketball right now, let alone at a high level. He's just enormous, and historically, being enormous, pretty helpful for being a good NBA basketball player. You're just a lot closer to the rim, man. It's that simple. I think when you look at the main strengths of Zach Edey, just kind of run through the college stat line first, I suppose. 25.2 a game, 12.2 boards, to go along with 2 assists and 2.2 blocks a game this past season for Purdue. Played 32 minutes, played all 39 games. Purdue started them all. Has been a workhorse the last couple of seasons. 32 minutes a piece for the last 32 minutes a game a piece for the last 2 seasons. His second to last college season, 22, 13, 1.5 assists. Very similar statistical profile. Again, he's the 2-time reigning college player of the year down in the States. He is a very, very good basketball player, or has been at Purdue. We'll see about the NBA. the things that should translate well to the NBA. I mean, he's got a lot of touch. For a guy as enormous as Zach Edey is, he has a ton of touch as an interior scorer, shot well over 75% on rim shots in his college season this past year. And, you know, when you throw it into him, just the ease of just kind of getting to a quick post move and putting up a little hook shot, that's just kind of his bag. He can do it with both hands, lefty, righty. He's got drop steps. He's got the, you know, the typical sort of bullying hook shot sort of profile to him. There's not a ton going on as far as an array of moves, but do you need a massive bag when you're 7'4"? Zach Edey's play suggests, you know, maybe not. It's not that he doesn't have any bag, right? Like he's got post moves, he's got counters, he's got things he can go to, but he's not this guy who's Hakeem Olajuwon in the post where he's sort of keeping you on your toes with all the different array of post moves he can throw at you. No, he's basically got like a few things he's really good at. And because he's enormous and because he has a nice deft touch, the ball goes in for him quite a bit. He shot 62% on 2-point shots this past season. And over the course of his 4 seasons in college, averaged out at about 62% on twos as well. You'll take that. You'll love that. Shot 62% overall. As a college player, as you'll note, doesn't take threes. Took 2 threes his entire college career. Was 1 of 2 this past season. We'll get into that a little bit. Wouldn't be banking on the 3-point shot necessarily, but we'll talk about that coming up and the reasons why he might struggle. You know, to me, a couple of the things really pop off with Zach Edey when you watch him. Just a massive, massive rebounding hub unto himself, defensively, offensively. When you're 7'4" and you're close to the rim, you're just going to have first right of refusal when balls come to you more often than not. And Zach Edey's damn good at scooping them up. This past season in college, pretty impressive numbers as far as rebounding go. Overall, 25.5 defensive rebounding percentage, which is actually his lowest of the last 3 seasons, but still very, very, very high. Offensive rebounding rate, 18.1%, which is below his heights of 21 near 22% in his second season at college, or sorry, second to last season at college, but still 18% offensive rebounding rate. Ridiculous. That's like compared to most guys, no one's ever going to sniff that in their careers for the most part, college or NBA. He's just damn good at collecting offensive rebounds, you know, and as the league skews more towards kind of the renaissance of offensive rebounding that we kind of saw start arguably with the Raptors back in like 2019-20. We saw it with the Memphis Grizzlies really around that time as well. Teams are prioritizing offensive boards a little bit more. It's easy buckets, right? You get an offensive board, you are in prime position to score an easy bucket. And as defenses get more sophisticated, as the possession game becomes more important, offensive rebounding feels like a thing that's kind of back in vogue. And that could be something that sees Zach Edey valued by a lot of teams. I think, for example, of the Memphis Grizzlies, who pick number 9, right? Like, you know, we'll get into the reasons why that might be kind of rich for Zach Edey to go at number 9. But if you're looking to kind of lean into your identity as an offensive rebounding hunting team, Zach Edey can really help you do that. 4.6 offensive rebounds a game this past season for Purdue. He gets them, and of course, he finishes around the rim really beautifully. And so if he's getting an offensive rebound, he's probably scoring on it. That can be a bit of a cheat code. And it also can be something that helps him counteract the sort of slow and, you know, lack of athleticism sort of tags that he has. You know, if you're not having to sort of track back off of misses on defense and instead you're, you know, tracking back after a make, way better chance that Edey can go get set in the defense, not have to worry about kind of sprinting up and down and getting behind the play if you're just finishing off a bunch of possessions with offensive boards and putbacks. The durability is real, right? He played 30 plus minutes a night, doesn't really miss games, doesn't seem to get all that much in the way of hurt or anything like that. It's a pretty impressive thing from Zach Edey in that regard. You know, I think you kind of put that in stark contrast with, say, Donovan Clingan, for example, who's projected to go much higher in the draft, the big from UConn, and he's, you know, kind of got the durability or the sort of the stamina question mark, right? Of can he play more than 20 minutes a night? He didn't really do that in college. Zach Edey, no such issue, just absolutely ate up minutes for Purdue as their best player. That's super valuable. I also think screening, just like a massive, massive screener. You watch Zach Edey, he's not doing these sort of fake dainty screens where a guy's slipping over and you're not making contact. No, when Zach Edey hits you with a screen, you know you've been hit by a 7'4", 300-pound dude with a screen. And that has a lot of value, right? We've seen the value of Jakob Poeltl's excellent screening and the sort of downside of not having it over the last year or so with him on or off the team. It's a valuable skill to have, and Zach Edey certainly brings that to the table. And I imagine sort of like a connection with Emmanuel quickly in that pull-up three-point shooting situation, right? Where, you're getting that extra little moment of space because Zach Edey has walloped your man. It's a valuable thing to have when you have a pull-up shooting guard as one of your foundational pieces. That's an interesting thing to think about here. Honestly, like overall, I think, you know, we'll get into some of the drawbacks, and I do think there are many that kind of keep him out of the star tier of players down the line. But I do think like there's a long-term NBA player here in Zach Edey because of the sort of situational dominance that he can go and exert with his size, with his post game, hunting mismatches, things like that. Maybe there's a little bit more as like a roller involved in his game, down the line. And a guy who comes to mind for me sort of in this vein is Jonas Valanciunas, who was this sort of dominant post-up guy. You can't really run an offense through a dominant post-up guy. And I think that's a fair thing. That was true 10 years ago. It's true now. But to have someone like Zach Edey kind of adapt to become more of a role man, I think there's something interesting there. And we saw that with Valanciunas too, right? As his time with the Raptors went on, they used him a little bit more and more in pick and roll situations with DeMar DeRozan, with Kyle Lowry in particular. And he was just bloody efficient, like one of the best pick and roll finishers in basketball, just as this massive, impossible to slow down tank of a man barreling towards the rim. You could see that being a future here for Edey. I really do think the sort of JV comp of, ceiling of like a starter level big man with some matchup dependence in certain instances where he's going to get played off the floor. But like he's a nice guy to have on the team and has like a pretty high floor as a player overall. I think that's kind of an interesting comparison for Edey. And look, Jonas Valanciunas has had himself a hell of a career. Maybe he's never going to be on the floor in high leverage finals moments or anything like that, but he's been a very effective player who's helped a lot of teams win a lot of regular season games. There's value in that, especially with the 19th overall pick. You're laughing if you get someone who has the career of Jonas Valanciunas. We'll get into some of the reasons why maybe the athleticism and slowness and things like that are a little bit more pronounced with Edey than they are with a guy like Valanciunas. Things that could prevent him from being an effective NBA player. We'll do that coming up in just a second here. But yeah, Zach Edey, there's a lot to like. It's just, is it the right stuff to like for this Raptors team at this moment? We'll start getting into that coming up in just one sec. Today's show is brought to you by friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, LED headlights, exhaust kits, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Back at it here on your Monday edition of Locked On Raptors. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks for making us your first listen of the day. All that good stuff. Also, go check out Locked On Sports Today 24/7. It's our all-day streaming channel covering all the biggest stories in sports. Locked On Mavericks, Locked On Celtics, Locked On NBA. On the NHL side of things, you got Locked On NHL, Locked On Panthers, Locked On Oilers. It's championship time, baby. And Locked On Sports Today 24/7 has you covered in a way that the big talking head shows obviously are not suited to do. Just go look at the internet today. Locked On Sports Today, it's a great, wonderful alternative to the channels that will yell at you all day long. All right, let's get back to it. Zach Edey, reasons why it just might not work out for him. And number one, I think, is just like speed, floor coverage, athleticism. Being 7'4", it's an incredible thing. But in the NBA, it's not just about size, right? We've talked about like the league skewing bigger, and this is very much a reason why you might take Zach Edey. Having someone who's 7'4" to throw out there as the league gets bigger, and guys, who are 7'2", 7'3", 7'4" become more commonplace in the league. Like, not a bad thing to have sort of a counter to those types of players. But I do think it's not just about size, right? It's about size plus skill. And I think when you look at, say, Victor Wembanyama, Chet Holmgren, those types of guys, like those guys bring skill with the ball, face-up ability, pull-up shooting, putting it on the deck, making things happen with a live dribble. Like that stuff I don't think Zach Edey is ever really going to bring to the table. He is pretty lumbering. He's not someone who's going to go attack a closeout and make something happen out of that. That's just not what his game is. And I think you have to sort of, any sort of talk of Zach Edey being a star, I just don't really see that being a thing in his future because of the lack of sort of versatility to the things to which he brings skill. He's got touch. He's got that sort of post scoring down, but can he sort of expand it out? I don't really think he's going to be a 3-point shooter. I know all of the sort of hoopla at the combine was, ooh, Zach Edey hit a couple of threes against chairs. He's got a 3-point shot now. And like, no, it's just like not how it works, man. Like, I know the free throw shooting is encouraging. He shot 71% from the free throw line throughout his college career on very high volume. Like the touch stuff from around the basket is nice, but if you look at his 3-point stroke, there's not a whole lot of tape of it, right? He hit 1 3 in college. It was a banked 3 from the top of the arc. There's just not a whole lot to go on to say, like, this guy is going to become a great 3-point shooter. To tie it back to Jonas Valanciunas, right? Like, Valanciunas was a guy who, as his Raptors career went along, he started to dabble and taking the odd catch and shoot triple, but they always kind of came sort of accidentally to him. It was never something they were designing the offense to do. And it's frankly something that defenses were more than okay to live with. Oh, the big bruising post guy who we can't stop down low is going to take threes. Fine by us. Like that is what the defense is thinking when a Jonas Valanciunas takes a 3. And it's going to be the exact same thing they're thinking if Zach Edey's taking threes. Again, you don't want to put a cap on a guy. Maybe a guy who can figure out over time how to become a 3-point shooter. It happens sometimes, but I do think in this situation, we look at the Brook Lopez types and say, well, anyone can be Brook Lopez. Like, no, if everyone could be Brook Lopez, everyone would be Brook Lopez. But if you look around the league, there are not that many players who fit the Brook Lopez archetype. And it's a hard thing to do. You can't go and chase outliers and say, that's the future for our guy. It's just not realistic. It's no way to build a team. If it happens, fantastic. It's gravy, but you can't expect gravy when you're going in with a prospect who has this little 3-point shooting tape. There's just not any there. And I think that's probably something you just got to kind of accept is just not going to be part of his repertoire. Then we get into the speed and athleticism stuff on defense, right? Like I think defensively, I think my sort of thing with the idea of the Raptors taking a big in this draft has been, I want to see scheme versatility. I want to see someone out there who can go and switch, who can offer something that you don't quite get from Kelly Olynyk and Jakob Poeltl, someone who's got a little bit more athleticism and burst and pop. A guy like Yves Missi from Baylor is someone who really stands out to me. Baylor and Oregon need to get New Jersey types. They're too similar. But anyway, Yves Missi, like that's a guy who super duper athletic, can maybe do a little bit more with the ball in his hands than Zach Edey can, has shown some flashes of putting things on the deck, and is just this like athletic, switchable, sort of modern big man. Like that's the type of guy I think the Raptors got to target here. We'll get in a little bit to maybe how the Raptors can kind of counteract that or sort of work around that if they were to take Zach Edey in the form of just kind of using Jakob Poeltl differently in a way he's maybe actually been kind of okay with. We'll do that coming up later on. But overall, like Zach Edey is a drop big. He's not going to be doing much else other than that. He just does not have the foot speed to cover ground. Obviously he's enormous, and having a 7'10" and a half wingspan and being 7'4" does a lot for you as far as just like getting from point A to point B. Your strides are Godzilla strides. They're going to get you places faster than a smaller player. But in the sort of instant read and react defense you have to play in the NBA, I think there's a real chance that if you start bringing him closer or further away from the basket, you're just going to get bludgeoned on the back end as he can't rotate back and protect the rim. That said, like rim deterrence is a real thing. And, Zach Edey just being 7'4" with a standing reach that nearly brings him to the rim is probably going to have a sort of, at the very least, like a psychological effect on opposing teams. Like there's some interesting stuff to work with there. But overall, like you're drafting him to play as a drop big man. You kind of have to build your defense around being a drop big man if you think Zach Edey is going to be a big part of your team, and you got to work from there. And look, drop defense is fine, right? Plenty of teams play a drop and it's successful. But I think if you are kind of hamstrung by the big men you have to only being able to play drop defense, like that is where things get tricky, right? In the playoffs, you want to have switchability. You want to be able to kind of change up the scheme possession to possession. If you're playing against a team, for example, in the playoffs, and they have 7 games to figure you out, you're only throwing one defense out there because you can only throw one defense out there. That's eventually going to be a wound that gets picked at to the point that it ruins you and is probably your downfall. And so I don't think Edey brings a ton of scheme versatility, right? And look, there are going to be comps to Rudy Gobert and Walker Kessler and eventually Donovan Clingan, surely, of, oh, well, if you're just like enormous and this big rim protector, like you can survive. But the thing is, like with the Rudy Gobert comparison, for example, that dude is a super fluid athlete for someone who is that size. He is obviously a lot trimmer and leaner and bouncier than Zach Edey is at 300 pounds, right? Like it's a totally different ball game. Rudy Gobert, as much as people like to pretend he's not a good defensive player, those people are idiots. Like, yeah, sometimes Luka Doncic will score a 3 over him in an ISO situation. Guess what? That happens to everybody. Rudy Gobert, if you look at the numbers, if you just watch him play basketball, he's one of the better switch defending bigs in the league. And I just don't see that being the case here for Edey. And that, I think, puts a cap on his overall defensive ceiling and, frankly, probably on how many minutes you can play him, and probably sort of pigeonholes him into a backup big role where he's trying to really make an impact in a shorter amount of minutes against second units where you can kind of hang in a little bit easier on defense. I think, like, for example, the pairing with Kelly Olynyk could be a little bit tricky. That is a slow front court. You get out of position at all, if you're chasing your tail a little bit on defense, like that is going to be a problem. And you're going to take Zach Edey away from the rim where his length and rim protection deterrence is going to be at the sort of peak value. Like it's just going to be really tough to stomach if you cannot, contain at the point of attack. If Olynyk and Edey are both out there defensively, I think that becomes really challenging. And I do just kind of worry about a few other things too, right? Like the playmaking. Is it there for Zach Edey to be this kind of guy who you dump it into and trust that he's just going to make plays out of the post, either read whether a double's coming or not, and score over single coverage, or make the play out of the double if it's there and he has to? And I think from his college tape, like, it's hard to feel super encouraged about that. He averaged 2 assists to 2.3 turnovers a game at Purdue. And when you watch him sort of pass out of the post, you look at the assists he creates out of the post. A lot of it is just like very simple. Oh, I'm posting up. Guy on the strong side comes to help and send the double. I make one pass to the guy on the strong side and the 3 goes up. It's like the sort of number one core tenet of defenses: don't help off the strong side. That doesn't always actually have to apply, and there are ways to work around that. But generally, I don't think Zach Edey was seeing like the most sophisticated defense in the world when he was at Purdue. And just because of the sheer might of being 7'4" and 300 pounds in the college game, he was able to pass over top of guys. He was able to kind of go through doubles and score anyway. I think it's a different game at NBA speed with NBA athletes and NBA big men up in his business. I also really think that there's a chance that Zach Edey becomes like lunch for the Fred VanVleets of the world. He's very big. If you get smaller guards coming in to dig down, swat balls away, like I think that could be a real liability for you. And it was in college, right? He was pretty turnover prone for a guy who got the ball as much as he did. Look, he could have averaged more than 2.3 turnovers a game easily. It's not as bad as it could have been. He's got the ability to kind of dodge and score and make those sort of easy, simple reads. But when things get more difficult in the NBA, when it's guards bearing down on him on those double teams, when doubles are coming from different angles and different passes become necessary than this simple straight, one pass out to the closest shooter, that's, I think, going to really challenge Zach Edey. And I'm not sure I've seen enough in watching him. And he's probably one of the guys I've watched the most in this class just by virtue of him being a Canadian playing at Purdue. Like, you see a lot of them, right? You pop up on TV. You see plenty of highlights, things like that. I'm not sure that the playmaking is going to hold up for a guy who figures to be a post hub once you get to the NBA, and defenses are just that much more smart about it. And so I think that's a real limiting factor. This would really necessitate him becoming a much better role man for sure. There's not a whole lot of tape of him being used as like a short roll guy or anything like that. Maybe that opens up his playmaking a little bit. He sees the floor with his face up as opposed to back to the basket, and there's more optionality there. That's kind of a big unknown mystery box as to, can he be a short roll guy? But thinking about the way the Raptors use their bigs, I don't see Zach Edey being someone who you really count on as like a dribble handoff hub, because you have to have at least some threat of doing something as a keeper in those dribble handoffs, whether it's pulling up and shooting, whether it's driving it to the basket and on a keeper play and scoring, like we saw, for example, with Jonas Valanciunas back in the day, where they really sort of mastered that keeper play. I think of that buzzer beater against the Bucks, for example, as sort of the prime example of this. I don't think Edey has the quicks, and this is the differentiation between him and a guy like Valanciunas, with the 5 extra inches of height and the extra poundage and all that stuff. Like, I just don't know if he's fleet of foot enough to, be a keeper in dribble handoffs and put the ball on the deck and go and make things happen. Like, it just doesn't feel like it's going to be part of his game. He's going to be very one-dimensional, I think, in the NBA. And that dimension could be fantastic, but is it worth it at the 19th pick? That's the real question here. It's a tough one, right? Like, he's got a lot going for him, and a lot that just feels maybe not suited to the way the NBA is kind of trending. We're going to get into the idea of the Raptors taking him at 19 and just how justifiable it may or may not be coming up here in just 1 second. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for small businesses, you want to find quality candidates who are right for your roles, and you want to do that fast because you got other things on your mind, right? You got a million hats you're wearing as a small business owner. You want to be able to hire efficiently and quickly and get the right people. That's why you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn is not just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion with a B professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. It gives you access to professionals you can't find anywhere else. LinkedIn does all that while making the process easy and intuitive. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. You should too. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, rounding things out here on the Zach Edey episode of Locked On Raptors. Thanks so much for being here. If you haven't yet, go check out last week's episodes. We did lots of stuff on Bruce Brown and Gary Trent Jr. Will Lou was on Friday. That was a fun episode. And obviously, we got lots of great draft stuff and off-season-y content coming for you this week as well. Let's get back to Zach Edey. Is this a pick the Raptors can make at 19 if he's there? And he may not be there, right? There are plenty of teams who could take him in the first 18 picks of the draft. But I think it's like 50-50 that he's going to be there at 19, maybe even slightly better than 50-50. Who knows? It all depends on how worried about the concerns and red flags all these other teams are. To me, at 19, it feels like a bit of a stretch. I know I mentioned the Jonas Valanciunas comparison. I don't quite think the ceiling of Jonas Valanciunas is there for Zach Edey, because I just think Valanciunas had a few extra things, little elements to his game that I'm just not sure Edey's going to be able to get to with his frame and his size and lack of speed. Look, it feels like it's on the table for the Raptors to take him, right? He's Canadian. Jonathan Wasserman over at Bleacher Reports had Edey to the Raptors at 19 and like a bunch of mocks recently. Do I think the mocks that have Edey going to Toronto are kind of missing the mark a little bit? It does feel like just kind of like easy content. Like, oh, Zach Edey to the Canadian team. Easy, done. I don't know if people are really looking at what the Raptors need and sort of baking that into their selection there. That said, a lot of these mock drafts come through reporting and stuff like that as well. And maybe there's some inkling that Zach Edey might be the guy for the Raptors. Of course, they're familiar with him, quite obviously, from his work with Canada Basketball. He's been around, obviously, Purdue for 4 years now. Everyone knows about Zach Edey. And look, I think it would go in line with their whole thing about Canadians, right? Like, again, I've kind of made my thoughts clear on this. I don't think it's a bad thing to pursue Canadians and use an advantage that you have that might keep guys happier playing here. But I also think we can be discerning about the Canadians the Raptors go and choose. There are 30 plus Canadians in the NBA, or will be soon. Like, it doesn't have to be that every single one is good or fits perfectly and must be acquired by the Raptors. Like, they can pick and choose a little bit here because there are so many Canadians around the league, and you can just accept when some of them are good fits and some are not. I just ultimately, I don't love the fit with the Kelly Yock front court for Zach Edey. It just feels a little bit too lumbering. It feels too drop dependent. It feels like there's not a lot of scheme versatility there. And that is my biggest reason, my biggest hang up for not wanting Zach Edey. If the Raptors had more of a sort of switchable, more athletic type big who is a bit different than Jakob Poeltl or Kelly Olynyk in the mix, like I could get on board with it, right? Like, okay, like you have a few different bigs with these sort of niche skills and they kind of blend together in different ways. Like I could get on board with Zach Edey being a pick if there was not already kind of a drop dependent big or a light on defense big in this group. But there is already in both Kelly Olynyk and Jakob Poeltl. And so I think really the only way you can justify taking Zach Edey and kind of having him be your backup center for the next few years, who you eventually hope to groom into the takeover guy for Jakob Poeltl, is if you believe that you can use Jakob Poeltl in more types of defense than just straight drop, which, look, history says might actually be a thing. I don't know how much I buy it. I don't know how much you want to go in and sort of, kind of accept that, okay, like Jakob Poeltl's our switch big now. But there have been moments where he's been pretty successful at that throughout his career. And I think a question the Raptors got to ask themselves is, can we actually bank on that being a viable path for us to play defense? Because if they do think it is, then the Edey thing becomes a little bit easier to justify. Edey becomes your drop guy, and Jakob Poeltl's someone here. He's going to be your drop guy more often than not, but he's the one you can bust out more sort of versatile, switchy packages with if you want to. If you just go through the numbers for Jakob Poeltl in his career, last season, not very good as an isolation defender. And if you go to, NBA.com, you go to play type stuff. I like to check out the isolation defense. I think it's pretty telling of like guys' ability individually and guys' ability to hang on switches, right? Most of the time, if Jakob Poeltl's guarding in an isolation situation, it's going to be in a switch where he's got a guard or a wing on him and he's trying to stay in front of. And for the most part in his career, he's been really successful at that. Last season, not so much. He was in the mid-20s as far as percentile, bottom quarter of the league as far as an individual isolation defender, as far as points per possession allowed. But for most of his career, he's kind of floated between like the 45th percentile and the 75th percentile. He's kind of been average to kind of good as an isolation defender throughout his career. And I think one of the things that's always stood out to me going back to scouting him ahead of the 2016 draft is Jakob Poeltl's fleet of foot, man. The guy can dance a little bit. The guy can get on the perimeter and stay in front of guys. Maybe that wasn't super omnipresent in his game last season, but I also think the Raptors defense was just like this rudderless, talentless mess last year. And I have a hard time evaluating anyone's individual defense really within that context. And so, maybe they view more sort of opportunities to bust out Jakob Poeltl as a switch defender, as someone who can kind of track away from the basket a little more effectively, with the idea that, okay, Jak's away from the basket, but Scotty Barnes is still roaming the baseline as that low help guy who can rack up the blocks and steals and protect the rim. Like maybe that's something they actually can go to next season. I don't think it's off the table. Now, Jakob Poeltl is not getting any younger. He's tracking closer to 30. Do you expect he's going to maintain that foot speed? Obviously, like 28. Like he's not dead or anything like that. He's doing just fine. I think he should be fine athletically for the next couple seasons. But, ankle injuries pile up, things like that. Who's to say that Jakob Poeltl's always going to be as fleet of foot as he's been at his peak? And maybe we're already on the downside of that. The Raptors would have way better sort of internal knowledge of that than we would. And I still think it's kind of a rich bet to say Jakob Poeltl, after mostly being a drop big for your entire career, you're actually going to be the guy that we bust out scheme versatility with. I think that's a lot to ask, even if there is some history for him that suggests he's pretty good at it, or can be pretty good at it in the right situations. I think I mentioned the Edey Olynyk pairing. I just think that's going to get cooked on defense. I really do. I think that's a lot to ask for. I think it's just tough. I would rather Yves Missi or Khalil Ware here from the Raptors picking at 19. I'd frankly probably rather Kyle Filipowski, who I just think offers a little bit more ball skill, a little bit more long-term projectability than a guy like Edey, who I kind of think is just like, we know what Edey's going to be in the NBA. And as much as I would love how, look, it would be a cool ass story if it worked out and Zach Edey became a starting level big for the Toronto Raptors. What a success story that would be. It would be awesome to root for. And if the Raptors do take him, of course, I'll be rooting for that to happen because it's a cool story that would benefit the Toronto Raptors. I just think with the big class being what it is, with Missi being this super athletic, switchable guy, Khalil Ware, obviously very volatile. We'll see how he actually ends up as a player, but the ceiling for that guy is 3-point shooting, modern rim protecting big. Those guys are hard to find. I think I would rather take those swings than take a swing on Edey, who I just think because of his physical profile, like it's at once like a great thing and also a thing that's going to hold him back, right? Being 7'4" and as big as he is what's going to get him on an NBA floor. It's also what could be what it could be the thing that plays him off the floor when things matter most. And so it's tough. I really struggle with it. I want to root for Edey. I just don't know if the fit's there for the Raptors, who, yes, they need big man help, but they need different types of big men. They need guys who have a little bit more athletic juice to them to offer different types of lineups and combinations with Scotty Barnes and Kelly Olynyk having some sort of rim protection, you know, outlet for him to kind of just like back him up a little bit and offer him some support in those second units. I think would be massive. And Edey can maybe do that part. I just think on offense, it gets really tricky. Unless you are drafting Zach Edey with the idea of this guy is eventually going to be the hub of our offense. We're going to turn back the clock to 1986. We're going to throw the ball in the post and have our guy go to work. I don't think you can really justify Edey being the pick at 19, as much as there might be some upside there. The playmaking to me is kind of the death knell. I just don't think the playmaking is at a super high level. And you couple that with the defense and the lack of speed and mobility. And I just feel like Zach Edey might end up being a nice player for some team. I think at the very worst, he's like a Boban Marjanovic level big guy who comes in and just like because of the sheer size and uncomfortableness of the matchup, he drives positive winning minutes for second units. But when things really matter, the chips are down, I don't think Zach Edey is someone who's going to be on the floor in high leverage major games. And hey, we'll get a chance to see him in high leverage games potentially this summer at the Olympics. We'll see how it works. And obviously, if the Raptors have taken him by then, there will be extra invested interest in what Zach Edey does for Team Canada. But for now, I just think there are going to be other bigs or wings I prefer the Raptors to take at 19 than Edey. If he's there at 31, sure, all day, happy to take a swing on it. It would be fun. And 31 is, you know, sort of more of the happy, fun, go lucky pick. The, hey, let's just take a swing and see what happens type of pick for me. But at 19, I think you got to get someone who's going to be a rotation player for you, who you really can count on to be a member of important minutes and important lineups with the Scotty Barnes, Emmanuel Quickly, RJ Barrett team going forward. And I just don't think you can bank on that with Zach Edey. And so at 19, not the pick for me. So we'll leave it there for now. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for messing with the show, supporting, following, subscribing, rating, reviewing, going to YouTube, going to the audio apps. It's always very, very much appreciated. Again, we'll be back again tomorrow. Topic TBD, probably some draft stuff. I got some more draft guys I want to talk about. I want to get into Johnny Furphy. I want to get into Pacome Dadier, who's rising up boards and maybe he's kind of a sexy pick at 19 for the Raptors. We'll get into all that coming up tomorrow and through the rest of the week. But in the meantime, thanks so much for hanging. We'll talk to you Tuesday with another episode of Locked On Raptors. Bye-bye. Ooh, nasty air. Boo.